You ever notice how trouble seems to show up the moment you finally let yourself breathe? That Saturday morning was supposed to be mine. No emergencies, no calls, no paperwork. Just a hot mug of coffee, boots kicked off, and the remote in hand while I sank into my old recliner. After a week of late-night shifts at the county sheriff's office, I'd earned it. For 5 glorious minutes, I had peace, until someone nearly pounded my front door off its hinges. The sound wasn't neighborly. It wasn't the gentle tap of a friend or even the urgent knock of a delivery man. This was heavy, deliberate, and laced with arrogance, the kind of pounding that made your gut tighten like you were about to be raided. I muttered under my breath, "What now?" Setting my mug aside before heading for the door. The sight that greeted me nearly made me choke on laughter. Two men stood there dressed in the most pitiful excuse for law enforcement uniforms I'd ever seen. Ill-fitting polyester shirts, cheap belts with no gear, and badges so shiny they looked fresh out of a Halloween costume bag. The taller one sported a thick mustache and mirrored sunglasses, puffing out his chest like he'd just stepped onto the set of a bad cop movie. "Sir, step outside immediately. You're under HOA arrest," he barked, flashing that toy badge in my face. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. HOA what?" "HOA arrest," he repeated with authority, while the shorter one, who was nervously clutching a clipboard like it was a holy relic, nodded earnestly. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, suppressing a smirk. "The HOA has an enforcement division now?" "That's right," Mustache Man announced proudly. "We've been authorized to enforce neighborhood ordinances and detain non-compliant residents." The absurdity was almost too much. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to spot a fraud from across the street. And these two practically had wannabe glowing above their heads in neon. Clipboard Boy flipped open his papers with great ceremony and began reading off alleged violations. "You have been cited for unapproved mailbox design and unauthorized patio furniture," he declared. I glanced toward my yard. Standard black mailbox, 2 Adirondack chairs on the porch, both well within city code. "You're kidding me," I muttered. Mustache Man stepped closer, snapping, "Non-compliance is a serious matter. Turn around. Hands behind your back." And that was the moment I decided playtime was over, because they weren't just harassing a homeowner. They were trying to arrest the sheriff of this county, and they had picked the wrong door. Mustache Man snapped his fingers like he was directing a play, and Clipboard Boy fumbled out a pair of flimsy handcuffs. I almost laughed. They looked like the kind of plastic junk sold at flea markets. "Turn around," Mustache Man ordered again, his fake authority dripping. "Last chance before we use force." "Force with what?" I asked flatly. "Those plastic bracelets?" His jaw tightened. "You think this is funny? The HOA takes compliance very seriously." I sighed like a weary teacher correcting a failing student. "Tell you what, why don't you tell me where this so-called compliance center is, and maybe I'll humor you." "We can't disclose locations to civilians," Clipboard Boy blurted, his voice cracking. That was the last straw. I couldn't hold back my laughter. "Civilians? Son, you're standing on my porch trying to arrest the sheriff. Do you realize how deep you've just buried yourselves?" Their bravado flickered for the first time, but instead of backing off, Mustache Man lunged forward, waving the cuffs. Big mistake. In one smooth motion, I caught his wrist, twisted it, and slammed him against the hood of the dented sedan they'd arrived in. He yelped like a scolded child. Clipboard Boy froze, clutching his clipboard like it was a shield. His eyes darted between me and his partner, terror creeping in. "Here's the difference between you and me," I muttered in Mustache Man's ear. "When I make an arrest, it's legal. You're looking at impersonating law enforcement, attempted unlawful detention, and a half-dozen other charges." Right then, the distant wail of sirens sliced through the neighborhood. Seconds later, 2 sheriff cruisers screeched into my driveway, lights flashing red and blue. Neighbors started peeking out from behind curtains, then from porches, and soon enough, phones were out, recording every second like it was a live episode of Cops. Deputy Carter, my right-hand man, stepped out first. He took one look at me, pinning Mustache Man to the car, and shook his head. "Boss, I leave you alone for one Saturday, and you're already wrestling grown men in Halloween costumes?" I grinned. They were trying to arrest me. Figured I'd return the favor. Carter chuckled, then plucked the shiny badge off Mustache Man's chest, flipping it over before holding it up for the crowd. "Y'all see this? Says HOA compliance officer. Not recognized by the county, the state, or anybody with half a brain." The crowd erupted in laughter. Clipboard boy went pale. Let's see some IDs. Real ones, Carter demanded, his easy grin gone. Clipboard boy fumbled with his wallet, finally handing it over. Carter glanced at it, raised an eyebrow, and whistled. Jake, you'll love this. Not only are they not cops, neither of them is even licensed as a security guard. I hauled Mustache Man upright so he could face me. Looks like you boys have been running a scam, and now you're done. Neighbors murmured, filming with phones held high. Clipboard boy stammered. This is a misunderstanding. We were authorized. The HOA board approved this operation. Carter's eyes narrowed, colder than a January morning. Son, the only people who can authorize a law enforcement action are sworn officers of the state. Newsflash, the HOA isn't the state. I stepped closer, arms folded. You thought you could play dress up, march onto my land, and pretend you had authority? That ends today. The shorter man's bravado cracked. But Karen from the board told us we had full compliance powers. She said we could arrest violators. Carter barked a sharp laugh. Arrest violators? That's felony impersonation of an officer, and you just admitted it, on camera, in front of half the neighborhood. Clipboard boy's knees buckled. He dropped his clipboard with a clatter. The crowd whispered and chuckled, some already speculating about lawsuits. A third cruiser pulled up, this one carrying Sergeant Morales. She stepped out, pen already scratching across her notepad as she surveyed the scene. All right, she announced, voice firm. Both of you are under arrest for criminal trespass, impersonating law enforcement, and attempted unlawful detention. You're also facing conspiracy charges since you acted together under fake authority. Mustache Man sputtered. Wait, you can't charge us for all that. Morales gave him a stare sharp enough to cut glass. Watch me. The cuffs clicked shut around Clipboard Boy's wrists as the neighborhood applauded. I let out a slow breath. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about making sure these clowns never swaggered onto anyone else's porch again. But if the arrests had been a spectacle, the fallout was a wildfire. Within 48 hours, the county prosecutor filed official charges. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves, but it was too late. Emails surfaced, dozens of them. The board president had encouraged these two compliance officers to enforce rules by any means necessary. That single phrase was enough to sink the ship. Suddenly, what had looked like a rogue stunt became a full-blown scandal. Neighbors who had quietly endured harassment came forward, clutching fake citations and threatening notes that the wannabe cops had distributed. One family even showed video of Mustache Man pounding on their door late at night, demanding they repaint their shutters. A class-action lawsuit formed within days, dragging the HOA into court for fraud, harassment, and intimidation. The press picked it up, plastering fake HOA cops across headlines. News vans circled the subdivision like vultures, and the board meetings became battlegrounds of finger-pointing and shouting matches. Meanwhile, my own lawyer worked the case like a well-oiled machine. Trespass, attempted kidnapping, emotional distress. The evidence was airtight. My security footage, deputy reports, neighbor videos, all of it stacked like bricks in a wall they couldn't climb. The HOA tried to argue immunity, claiming they had limited enforcement powers. But when the judge saw those costumes and read the emails, she nearly laughed them out of court. By the time the gavel fell, the HOA was in ruins. The board president was banned from ever holding office in a community association again. The two fake cops were convicted, handed probation, fined heavily, and saddled with permanent records that would haunt them forever. Neighbors, once divided by HOA politics, bonded over shared relief. No more phony tickets slipped into mailboxes. No more midnight pounding on doors. No more bullies in polyester uniforms pretending to hold authority. Weeks later, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching a for sale sign go up in front of the ex-president's house. The irony wasn't lost on me. For once, the community wasn't whispering in fear of the board. They were laughing, swapping stories, and reclaiming their peace. Poetic justice, I thought. Because if there's one thing those wannabe cops never understood, it's this. The law isn't a game. And in my county, my home, and my neighborhood, fraud will never win.